they just grab whoever's there and they charge them and try to make the case they did it. You know, there you go. I mean, and yeah, here we are again. I'm sure people will start piling back in here. Here we are. Somebody post the link, please, in the old chat. Bring everybody over. Blah blah blah. Here we go again. Here we go. Isn't that Ronald Reagan? There you go again. Right? Isn't that a Ronald Reagan moment or something? But yeah, I mean, policing agencies, the way that they tend to operate, there's very little of the Sherlock Holmes stuff. There's very little of this. We're gonna investigate the crime. Very, very, very little of that. Very, 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 very little of that. If someone could please post the link in the old chat. So annoying, but we continue. The show must go on. The show must go on. But, in reality, the point I was making is in reality, the police do very, very, very little actual detective stuff. And they do a lot of grabbing people, a lot of intimidating people into confessing, right? That's a big part of, they talk about police interrogation. It's about, threatening people, making them afraid until they confess to something they didn't do, right? I mean, obviously, this in the United States, torture is technically illegal. I mean, there was a police officer in Chicago for years named John Burge, who did torture people with electrical shocks and other things to get people to confess to crimes they didn't commit. He did that for years. He just, zapped people and, so that does go on. Torture does go on. It's illegal technically. I mean, but a lot of what police do is pressure people into confessing, on top of that, that, grabbing whoever is convenient and trying to make a case that they did it, and the police shows are just, it's propaganda. And that's why I can't stand to watch Law and Order. I can't, my wife likes those shows. I don't like those shows. Don't like them. I don't like those shows because I'm sorry, as somebody who went to court with police brutality victims in Cleveland and saw what happens, not only do the police beat up people, but then they ruin their lives for years. They have to go to court. I'm sorry, but it's like the reality of what policing, is, I'm sorry, is just, it's false. It's false. And, I just, I'm sorry. I mean, what I've watched, how police officers get up on the stand and lie blatantly. And, don't take my word for it. Alan Dershowitz, who's one of the leading legal scholars, has talked about how police perjury is just pretty standard in American courtrooms. Police get up there and lie through their teeth. And I've seen that. I've sat there, and like even like judges don't believe cops and stuff. They know they just make stuff up, and it's like your obligation as a police officer to say things that are not true. Practically, you sit down with the prosecutor, and the prosecutor says, "Okay, what I need you to say is blank," and then they get up there and they do it. And the prosecutor, of course, never prosecutes them for perjury if it ever shows up, because they're police. They're on the same team. The cops and the prosecutor are on the same team, trying to put people away. So yeah, the way our legal system works is, and this is what I tell people, right? Okay, the way it works in any society is that if the state wants to go after you, usually you're screwed, right? Now, it's possible though, if the state goes after you, you might be well connected enough, you might be wealthy enough that you're not screwed. You can get out of it. But for the most part, if the state goes after you, you're screwed. And that's how it is in the United States. And we dress it up in all these pretensions that it's something different. Oh, no, no, no. We have this amazing legal system and innocent until proven guilty. Bull honky. No, no, no. In the United States, just like any other country, if the people that are in power want to go after you, if you're well connected enough, if you're wealthy enough, you got the right friends, you got enough, media attention or whatever, maybe you can get out of it. For the most part, no. And that's generally how it is, in the United States. I mean, they talk about prosecutors. They don't prosecute crimes. They prosecute people, right? They find a name. They say, we're going to go after this person. And they go after that person. They try to get anything on that person, right? Anything, right? Anything. And I mean, going after somebody is a financial decision. I mean, they have a limited budget, they have limited staff and time, and if they make the decision, this person is who we want to go after, they do, right? And most of the time, again, the conviction rate, 90% of 99% of cases don't go to trial. The ones that do go to trial, the conviction rate is still massive. It's massive. And so, basically, if the state wants to go after you, you're screwed, right? But again, if you're wealthy enough, if you're well connected enough, if you've got enough people behind you, it can be different, but for the most part, if the state wants to go after you, you're screwed. And it's the exact same way in Iran, and it's the exact same way in Venezuela, it's the exact same way in Cuba, it's the exact same way in China, right? The dressings are a little bit differently. It's dressed up a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, it's the same, which is if the people in charge, if the people who run the state want to go after you, you're screwed unless you're well connected and rich enough. And that's like that in any country in the world. And I mean that's just kind of how the world is now. Again, what frustrates me is that the U.S. legal system dresses it up in all this fancy propaganda and pretends that's not what happens. And they pretend, oh no, we this and that. And that's the problem with the United States. If they would just be honest, right? Why can't we just be honest, right? The USA is run by billionaires and bankers. There's rivalries between the billionaires and bankers. There's local government, state government. But at the end of the day, if we want to come after you, we can. But no, we have to dress it up in this, innocent until proven guilty, and everyone gets their day in court. No, they don't. Most people plea bargain. Innocent until proven guilty. That's funny because the conviction rate, even the people who choose to go to trial, most of whom are probably innocent. Why would you go to trial? Why would you go to trial? Any case that goes to trial in the United States, if you go to trial in the United States, something's wrong. Now, I mean, it could be that it's your third strike, right? In some states where they have a 3-strike law, your third felony, you automatically get 25 years. You can be guilty as sin as your third felony. You're going to go to trial to try to do anything to get out of that third strike. Okay. Maybe you're wealthy, Harvey Weinstein. He was guilty as sin, but he was Harvey Weinstein, millionaire. So of course he's going to go to trial, right? He's trying to make the case he was innocent. But for the most part, if people go to trial, if they actually take the time to spend the money that it's going to cost to go to trial, number one, to invest the time, it's like you're talking like 2 years of your life. I mean, a trial isn't quick. It's so there's that. If someone goes to trial, they're probably innocent. Given Kamala apparently spent most of her teens in Quebec, does she at least speak French? That would be a genuine. I've never asked Kamala if she speaks French. Maybe you should ask her that. I have no idea. I have no idea what languages Kamala Harris can speak. But there you go. But I mean, you can at least if someone takes the time of going to trial, puts themselves through the trauma of waiting for 2 years to find out if they're going to go to prison, of spending all that money, of being interrogated on the witness stand, being terrified if someone goes through that and doesn't take a plea deal, the chances are they're probably innocent. Okay? And you should remember that. Remember that if you're ever on a jury, right? I mean, now, obviously, there are exceptions to that. Like I said, third strike, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby. I mean, there are obviously people who, they go to trial because they can or whatever. But, if you're ever on a jury, remember that. The chances are the person is probably innocent, right? If they're going to take the risk of having a jury trial. But still, they get convicted. Overwhelmingly, the Bronx in the United States, the county of the Bronx, has the lowest conviction rate in the country. And you know what it is? It's 2/3. 66% of people get convicted at jury trials in the Bronx. And that's the lowest in the country. So think about that. Basically, if the state wants to come after you, you're probably screwed. And it's like that in every country in the world. And the annoying thing is that we have these pretensions that, oh no, in America, it's all, that's what bothers me about it, right? I don't know why we can't just be honest that, we have a ruling class. That ruling class, exercises its power. I mean, there you countries allowed to grow. Countries allowed to grow. Can you give examples of that? Well, sure. During the Cold War, it was possible during the post World War II economic expansion. The economy was growing enough, and the threat of communist revolution was real enough that the United States did buff up a lot of its allies. You had a lot of military juntas in the developing world that the United States allowed to develop and enabled to develop. Great example is POSCO, right? In 1969, you had, or earlier than that, you had the U.S. government working with the government of South Korea, and basically forcing Japan to lend all kinds of money to South Korea to build a steel industry, and develop a middle class in South Korea, the Park Chung-hee dictatorship. So after the Korean War, you had Syngman Rhee. Syngman Rhee was the military dictator of South Korea. And he was awful and tortured people and all of that. And the students overthrew him. It was called the April Revolution. You had this uprising that toppled Syngman Rhee, the military dictator of South Korea. So then in the 60s, Park Chung-hee became the dictator of South Korea. And the United States realized that, if you're going to have a dictator, you're going to have a military dictator in South Korea, you need to stabilize the country. If not, you're just going to have another revolution. So Park Chung-hee, the U.S. government worked with Park Chung-hee to economically develop South Korea, to stabilize the government of South Korea, so they didn't have a revolution like they had in the North. They didn't have another revolution and eventually join North Korea. There's a couple other examples. Another example would be the White Revolution of Iran, right? Iran, country in the Middle East, lots of, at the time there was lots of poverty and such, big gap between the rich and poor. In 1963, the Kennedy administration worked with the Shah of Iran to launch the White Revolution. And that was, they lifted some of the more social conservative restraints on women. They redistributed land to the peasantry, and they built an airline, and they built some railroads. And that was the U.S. government. And the U.S. government arranged for Iran to get loans and all that to do it. But it was because, again, they didn't want there to be a communist revolution in Iran, and they feared, that if that were to happen, that Iran would would become communist. So they had a white revolution to prevent a red revolution. And so occasionally you will see moments where the imperialists basically, they want to prevent a society from having a full-blown communist revolution. They want to use a society as a buffer against communism or something like that, and they will allow that. The Asian tigers are really a great example. I mean, you have South Korea, you've got Taiwan, you've got Singapore, and the Asian tigers, the reason they were allowed to develop, and there was heavy state involvement, it wasn't a free market. Milton Friedman is just a liar. I mean, when Milton Friedman uses Hong Kong and Singapore as examples of free market capitalism, what is he smoking? I mean, there's a huge amount of state involvement in those economies. I mean, the amount of government involvement is massive. Same for South Korea, same for Taiwan. I mean, the USA did allow them to use the government to develop significantly. And that was about, again, they needed a buffer against communism. And you'll notice in the 1990s, there was this huge thing called the collapse of the Asian markets, where the United States strategically pulled all of its money and all of its investment out of the Asian markets. In 1999, you had this, economic downfall that was caused by the collapse of the Asian markets. And the USA, they didn't like what's his name? They didn't like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. They didn't like him. They didn't much care for him. He often didn't do what they wanted. A lot of people think the United States killed Park Chung-hee. I mean, there's a lot of conspiracies that think that may have happened, or it was U.S. aligned factions in the South Korean military. Towards the end of his leadership, Park Chung-hee was kind of having a falling out with the United States. And so these Asian tiger countries, as they developed, they became more independent. The USA didn't like it. But the USA didn't like it. But yeah, I mean, there's examples of that, right? There's examples, sure. And I mean, there you go. Neoliberalism, it was kind of a turning point where the USA stopped doing that, right? But there you go. Someone says they want to start using upside-down American flags. I mean, okay. I mean, that's been around. It is the international symbol of distress. That's been, excuse me. Getting a little tired, but yeah, that's been around. I mean, that's not a new thing. But people have been doing that for a while. The international symbol of distress, and it's a it's a political statement. People put flag stamps on envelopes upside down. People wave the flag upside down at protests. I mean, that's people have been doing that. I'm not opposed to such a thing, but it's a thing people do. All right, anti-imperialist songs. Well, you can check out Dean Reed, right? Somos los revolucionarios, right? There's a lot of anti-imperialist songs from Latin America. El pueblo unido, más será vencido, right? I mean, there's a whole tradition of right. Stand up and fight, for victory will come. Da 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 da. Right? That's an anti-imperialist song. That's great. What other anti-imperialist songs are there? Right? There's a lot of anti-imperialist songs from the Middle East. From Syria. There's a lot of Syrian anti-imperialist music you can listen to. Like what is it? The one song is like Homeland something, and I don't know. Predictions on the upcoming Russian presidential election. I don't have a prediction. I don't have a prediction on that, Thurston. I just don't. But there's that, and oh, what else? There's anti-imperialist songs from all over the world. And there's anti-war, I should say anti-war songs in the United States. There's a long history of anti-war, anti-war songs, that oppose, I know there's a song about, there's a song opposing, there's a counter recruitment song that Joe Hill did called Stung Right, right? And it was about how military recruiters lie and trick you. And Joe Hill did, Stung, right? Right? Oh, geez, how does that go? Favorite versions of the Internationale. All right. Oh, wow. But versions of Internationale. Right. But what is it? Joe Hill had. It was the song. It's like, right, you know, the U.S. Navy. Oh, they said it was not a place for slaves. The only thing you have to do is stand and watch the waves. I don't remember it. I was stung right, STUNG, stung right. Yeah. It was kind of a counter recruitment song from Joe Hill. Right? And Joe Hill had one song that you will not, there's very few recordings of it because it's so radical. When people think of Joe Hill and his stuff, you generally think of, Sweet By and By or, Pie in the Sky or whatever. But no, but, Joe Hill had a song, Should I Ever Be a Soldier? Beneath the red flag I will fight. Should a gun I ever shoulder, it's to crush the boss's might. Join the army of the toilers, men and women fall in line. Wage slaves of the world unite, do your duty for the cause of land and liberty. That's some good stuff. All right, is the DPRK to blame for its problems? I don't know. I would think that their biggest problem is the fact that the USA killed 4 million of their people during the Korean War and bombed every single building above 1 story tall. And then you add on to that the United States, the United States then bombed the dams and caused flooding. Then you add to that they were blockaded by the United States, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, they couldn't get oil to run their food system, so millions of people died from malnutrition. And the United States has been, actively threatening them and trying to destabilize them for decades. But is it possible that I'm sure there's some things they could be doing that they could be doing better? I feel like that's a gotcha question, right? You're trying to get me to say, oh no, it's all America's fault. They've never done anything wrong, and then you can clip it and say, what a stupid tanky, And it's like, come on, okay? Any country's going to make mistakes. Any country's going to have problems. The DPRK, they are in very, very bad circumstances as a result of U.S. imperialism and many things. But, there are policies that they have as well, right? Just like any other country, they make decisions. So that the way that question is framed, I will say I don't appreciate, I mean, I don't know your intentions of asking that question. Sometimes I misinterpret questions, but, if you're on here to try and get me to say something that you can, like, get me in trouble with, please don't. Please don't. Please don't. Right? Again, ask me what I think. I'll tell you what I think. Disagree with me. But this, like, silliness where it's like we're going to try to get him to, like, have a clip where we can get him saying, don't do that. Come on now. The DPRK has problems. I mean, I'm sure that there are decisions the DPRK's leadership made that have contributed to their problems. Same could be said of any country in the world, but probably their biggest problem is U.S. imperialism. And people don't want to. People act like killing 4 million people is not a big deal. That's a little bit of a big deal. Anti-Sovietism and anti-Semitism. That's an interesting thing. I mean, the idea that communism is a vast Jewish conspiracy, that's a big part of anti-Semitism, has been for a long time, right? The communism, the evil Bolshevik conspiracy, right? That's a big thing. It has been. I mean, that's the oldest trope. And the claim, which I have thoroughly debunked, this claim that the Bolshevik Revolution, was somehow a conspiracy by Wall Street, and Jacob Schiff paid for it all. That's I have videos debunking that. That's not true. Jacob Schiff was the main backer of the World Zionist Organization, and he backed something called the Russian Freedom Group, which was against the Tsar, but they were anti-Bolshevik. And during the Russian Revolution, he was constantly trying to get Jews to leave Russia and go to Palestine, to the settlements there. So, Jacob Schiff was not a supporter of the Bolsheviks. In fact, the Jacob Schiff Center, which was a major synagogue in New York City during the 1930s, was very anti-communist. It was a center of anti-communist sentiments in the Jewish community in the Bronx. So that claim that, that you'll hear from anti-Semites that Wall Street funded the Bolshevik Revolution, that's bull honky. What is true is the Germans funded the Bolshevik Revolution. And everybody knows that Lenin got financial support from the Germans. And so part of the reason I think the Nazis pushed this conspiracy theory that, it was secret Wall Street conspiracy. I think the reason the Nazis pushed that was because they were embarrassed about the fact that the German government had way more to do with the Bolsheviks coming to power. So there you go. How has Marxism influenced architecture? Well, that's interesting, right? When I went to Brazil, I went around to a lot of the different sites in Brazil, some of the buildings in the capital of Brazil, Brasilia. And they were designed by communist architects, a lot of them. And, communist architecture tended to emphasize modernism, right? You get a lot of architecture that tries to emphasize, like, Greek buildings, like the columns, like you see in ancient Greece, like at the Parthenon. And, you see like Gothic architecture, it's like, like the medieval cathedrals and stuff. But communist architecture was always very modernist. Communist, architecture, the Soviet Union, they were always trying to build, stuff that looked like it was from outer space or something that looked like it was from a science fiction movie. Communism is a very futurist ideology. What was Lenin and Bolsheviks' actual stance on the Russian Orthodox Church? Lenin on Orthodox Church. Communists. Communism. How many movies did the Soviet Union make? And they were sci-fi movies. They were movies about outer space and space travel and things like that. There was communism is looking towards the future, not looking back. And so that you could say that a lot of if you look at look at the way the UN is, like the interior design of the UN, the way the UN buildings look, that kind of 1960s, modernist architecture, that a lot of that was very Soviet influenced. A lot of it was. Alrighty. Why is nonviolence fetishized? Well, look, and the person asked about climate change. Well, the solution to climate change, first of all, is technological progress. We need Fusion City, right? We need to get beyond fossil fuels to a higher and more efficient mode of energy, right? And the prevailing view among people who believe in climate change is they say, we need to go backwards, we need degrowth, we need to use less, and that's not going to happen. Human beings don't work that way. Human beings move to a higher mode. There is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to the irrational capitalist system. But yes, we need to get off of fossil fuels and we need fusion energy. Why is nonviolence fetishized? Well, I think there's a couple layers to this. So I think that we're living the left is unfortunately very, very much stamped by the 1960s new left, right? And if you read, there's actually an interesting book called it's a history of democratic students for a democratic society, but it's like a comic book, right? And it goes over the history of SDS, which was this big activist group in the 1960s, a big communist activist group leftist activist group in the 1960s, Students for a Democratic Society. And it started in the early 60s and it collapsed in 1969 as like different Maoist communist factions were fighting over it, but it was this mass group. But you'll notice this was the main group protesting Anti-Monopoly Coalition. This is the main group protesting the Vietnam War, and look like today, it's and they started out trying to do the 1930s again. They tried to build unemployment councils and stuff, but it didn't work. And that in the 1960s, a big part of the Vietnam War protest movement was pacifism. It was just, and a lot of it was that, coming out of the coming out of the Second World War, the 50s and 60s, the USA had a huge middle class. Huge middle class. People that, grew up in the suburbs and, suddenly people whose parents had been impoverished or, working class, you had a rise, an expansion of the middle class. And so you had, they talk about, Dr. Spock and, that there was more, that the children who grew up in the 50s had a lot more, affection and a lot more, their parents were a lot less rigid with them and they lived a much more kind of coddled existence. Book that was like a bestseller. I remember I read called "Growing Up Absurd," and it was like the 1950s, the 1950s parents trying to understand that their children, the rise of juvenile delinquency, and you talk about all of this. Like they talk about the generation gap. That was a big trendy thing to talk about in those days, and it was just the boomers, the baby boomers, they grew up with a level of comfort that their parents did not have. Um, and, so the idea originally, the various leftist groups tried to oppose the Vietnam War on a class basis, right? Don't go fight in a boss's war, etc. It didn't work, right? It didn't work. But one thing they did realize is there were a lot of kids who grew up in the 50s in the middle class who were getting drafted and didn't want to go fight in a war. And a lot of that was about, that joining the military is a very working class thing to do. The military is not a fun experience. It's a very working class thing. Soldiers, it's not maybe the officers, the officers are comfortable, but being a rank and file soldier is not something that some kid who's grown up in the suburbs, would want to do with his time. Even if he doesn't go out in the battlefield and have to kill somebody, it's a very working class experience. Appealing to the desire of middle class kids not to go and die and kill, right? And that kind of appealing to the middle class comforts of the baby boomer generation. It worked, and the pacifism stuff and the ideological nonviolence was very effective in the 60s because again, opposing the Vietnam War on a class basis didn't exactly work so much, but opposing it on a pacifist basis was much more effective. It happened. This may be remnants of the new left. So there you go. I remember I went to a peace studies program when I was in high school. I got some college credit, and it was run by some Quakers, and I got college credit for going to this peace studies program. It was all, they pushed color revolutions, win without war. We can have color revolutions instead of bombings, and the nonviolence. The Quakers, the nonviolence stuff. A lot of that is tied in with Soros, and it's like, it's a more effective way to be imperialists. Bombing and destroying countries, that creates resentment. But if we can go there and manipulate people, we can bring down the Soviet Union without a shot fired. They were hailing the fall of the Soviet Union as a great victory for nonviolence. Oberlin is not a Quaker college, but yeah, that's a big thing. All right. Next question. Why didn't the neocons split after 2003? Well, see, first of all, what do you mean they didn't split? Because neocon, there's no like club, okay? There's no club of neocons. There's no like, there's no like membership cards, for being a neocon, right? Neoconservatism refers to a school of thought, of a strategic way of marketing U.S. interventions, and U.S. foreign policy, and neoconservatism. That's the two individuals. If you want to understand what a neoconservative is, the two individuals that you need to understand are Irving Kristol and Leo Strauss. Irving Kristol was a Trotskyite communist who got involved with the CIA, and over the course of the 60s and 70s became a conservative strategist for like the Nixon administration, right? And he remarketed conservative politics in a way that worked post, World War II. So there's that. And then Leo Strauss was a college professor of philosophy, fled Germany, and taught at the New School in New York City. And Leo Strauss was an elitist, and he very much trained a lot of very influential people to think in a very elitist way. And Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol cultivated a school of political thinkers, and their politics it's not widely available. It's hard to get your hands on their writings and such. And some of the people that are influenced by Irving Kristol and Leo Strauss, you meant split up, partition Iraq in 2003. Okay, you're asking something completely different. Okay, I'm sorry. You're asking why did they not divide the country of Iraq, not divide the neocons? Okay, sorry. Totally different direction. So we're coming at this from a totally different angle now. Reverse. Okay. Why did they not divide Iraq? Well, I maintain that the point was to have instability, and that balkanizing it could potentially lead to stability, right? If you just divided it, you had Kurdistan, you had Sunni Iraq and Shia Iraq, then everyone would be within their borders and they'd all get along, right? The goal is to have permanent instability and have that instability spill over the border into Iran, spill over the border into Syria, and that just straight up, drawing new borders might lead to something stable. And the goal of these interventions is to create instability. It's like when the Romans defeated Carthage. They didn't put all the people of Carthage, that's in Tunisia, that's an ancient kingdom that was the Romans fought, and they fought Carthage, and when they defeated Carthage the last time, again and again the Romans fought Carthage. When they defeated Carthage last time, what did they do? Now, did they immediately put the people of Carthage to work growing crops for them? No. The Romans ground salt into the soil, right? They got sea salt, and they ground it into the soil of Carthage so that nothing could grow up there again. They didn't want to have to fight against Hannibal or against, the people of Carthage again. So rather than, utilizing Carthage for its resources, they ground salt into the earth to make sure that no crops could grow there, to make sure that Carthage stayed poor and underdeveloped. That's what the imperialists are doing in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan. They're grinding salt into the earth in the 21st century way. They're making sure that nothing like Saddam Hussein and Ba'ath socialism ever emerges again by having long-term sectarian war. Nothing like Gaddafi ever emerges again, right? That's the strategy, right? That's the strategy. All right. Sorry about the confusion about the question there. All righty. All forms of statism are wrong. First of all, what is statism? I mean, I've heard people argue that, statism means you're for the government for government's sake. Well, look, at the end of the day, I would like to see a world that is so prosperous and so much, abundance and prosperity that the need for the state can wither away, and we can have a world without coercion where people can kind of just do what they want and take what they need, right? That is the ultimate goal, right? State power is not celebrated as an end unto itself, right? I think we would all prefer that there be no government. I think we'd all prefer that. But there has to be a basis for it, right? And the way the world currently exists, we need a state and we need a social contract. The road to getting beyond that and lifting social restraints is vast material abundance. But when you moralize it like that, why did the state emerge? With the origin of private property. Why did we have states? Did humans become evil when private property was invented? Why do states exist then? Because people are just evil? They haven't. Come on, come on. The state and social hierarchy is rooted in the economic base. You need to think in a historical materialist sense. You need to think in a historical materialist sense that it's rooted in the economic base. Humans are struggling for a higher mode of production. And with a high enough mode of production, the state could fade away. I don't like government in and of itself. It's interesting. I feel like, in a lot of ways, the human relationship with the government is a lot like a child's relationship with their parents, right? Children need their parents. But at the end of the day, children hate their parents. And that this is a lot of the confusion children have when they're growing up. And on the one hand, they need their parents. They depend on their parents. They can't live on their own. They're children. But on the other hand, they hate their parents because their parents control them. Their parents, restrict them. Their parent, and the state is like that. We need the state, but we hate the state, right? Well, eventually, humanity will grow into we'll reach adulthood. And we'll reach the point we don't need a state. But right now we need a state, but we all hate the state. No one likes the state. We would all like to have a world where we could all just do what we want. But we're not there yet. And the basis of getting there is economic. So there you go. The road to a world without a state is vast economic abundance. We have to get to a higher mode of production, rationally organizing the means of production, breaking down inequality. All right, Deng Xiaoping reforms and glasnost perestroika. I've been asked this question many, many times. I think it's the same person who keeps asking me this, and I don't know why they keep asking the same question, but I will say one of the biggest differences was this, okay? The Chinese Communist Party, at the time of the Deng Xiaoping reforms, was on the same page, believed in communism, was carrying out the reforms because they thought it would make a more prosperous China, and was strategically carrying them out. The Soviet Communist Party in the 80s, at the time that they were implementing glasnost, was beneath the surface, full of people who didn't believe in communism, very divided, not on the same page. There was a pro-Western faction, there was an orthodox, nationalist, and conservative opposition faction. And glasnost was carried out in a way, glasnost and perestroika was carried out in a way that all of the confusion and instability beneath the surface came boiling out and led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Whereas the Deng Xiaoping reforms were carried out in a way that the Chinese Communist Party could move in a unified manner to utilize foreign investment to make China expand. The Chinese Communist Party were on the same page at the time that their reforms happened. The Soviet Communist Party was not on the same page at all. And that's a difference. That's a very, very big difference. That the Soviet Union very much, the way it functioned, by about World War II, the way the Soviet Union functioned was very, very rigid, right? And average people were kind of staying out of politics, and it was very hard to change the Soviet system. It needed change, but every time somebody tried to change it, it was a disaster. Khrushchev tried to change it, to some degree or other, and it was a disaster. Brezhnev tried to change. It was like the way the Soviet system operated. About World War II, the Soviet system became very entrenched and rigid and started to slow down a little bit. They still had great amounts of economic growth, but the rate of growth was slowing somewhat because of the rigidity of the system. They needed to change, but their ability to change was decreasing. They were being very entrenched in their ways, very solidified by all of that they endured. Whereas the Chinese Communist Party has never been the same. The Chinese Communist Party is constantly evolving. The 50s were different than the 60s, 60s were different than the 70s, 70s were different than the 80s, 80s were different than the 90s. There's no rigidity. The Chinese Communist Party is, yes, it's a very hierarchical organization that has leadership. It's very centralized, but they're constantly evolving. The way they do things is constantly in a state of change, and they're constantly testing policies in one city and then implementing them somewhere else, and they're constantly toying and adjusting their model. The Soviet system, it was like they couldn't adjust it, whereas the Chinese system is constantly adjusting. It's constantly adjusting itself. It's like it never stops adjusting itself. And that's the difference, right? The only thing constant is change. The Soviet system couldn't change, so the Soviet system went away. The change came without them. Whereas the Chinese Communist Party is constantly changing the way they operate to make it more effective, so they keep changing as the world keeps changing. The Chinese system keeps changing along with the world. The Soviet system was not able to change as the world changed. All right. Italy is an imperialist country. Italy, there is Italian imperialism. I mean, Italy occupied, was the colonizer of Libya. It was the colonizer of, Mussolini seized Ethiopia, right? And that, especially under Mussolini, I mean, Italian corporations are making super profits from their expansionist efforts. They had, I mean, Italy was an imperialist country, is still to this day an imperialist country. There's Italian corporations that super exploit countries in the developing world for super profits. Italy is an imperialist country. It's not as big in the imperial club. It's not up there with France and the United States and Britain and Germany, but it's an imperialist country. I mean, there's Italian imperialism for sure. I do know that that there was a lot of British, in the 1800s. The British had a lot of influence in Italy, and they were meddling in Italian politics, and that, Italy again, have they become full sovereign imperialists in their own right? I mean, the British have always had a lot of influence there, and there's, but yeah, I mean, look at. I mean, the way Italy's operated, even up to this day, I mean, Italian corporations exploit countries in the developing world. There's, the whole, the colonization of Ethiopia, the colonization of Libya. There's a huge amount of North Africa. There's a lot of, military operations. I mean, come on, come on. Yeah, Italy's imperialist. All right. Versions of the Internationale. Well, I like the standard American lyrics. I loathe with a passion the Billy Bragg version of the Internationale. I never want to hear the Billy Bragg lyrics to the Internationale ever again. I loathe them, loathe them, loathe them. Stand up, all victims of oppression. Oh, God, I want to barf. It's like a gender studies thesis, right? It's some SJW. I mean, it's like, oh my God. I mean, that's not Marxism, okay? Not Marxism, all right? The standard American lyrics I like, right? Right? Arise, ye prisoners of starvation. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For justice thunders condemnation. A better world's in birth. No more tradition's chains shall bind us. Arise, ye slaves, no more in thrall. The earth shall rise on new foundations. We have been naught, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict. Let all stand in their place. The international working class shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict. Let all stand in their place. The international proletariat shall be the human race. We want no condescending saviors to rule us from the judgment hall. We workers ask not for their favors. Let us consult for all. To make the thieves give up their booty, to free the spirit from the cell. Each must themselves decide their duty. They must decide and do it well. Yeah, I like the second verse there that I just sang you, right? You know, um, you know, what is it? To make the thieves give up their booty, to free the spirit from the cell. Each must themselves decide their duty, and must decide and do it well. That often I find myself presenting people with that choice, saying, you know, you have to think, you have to decide for yourself. I'm not able to, force you to do things. But, I often find myself playing the role of saying to people, you need to figure out what role you're going to play in all of this. That's the role that I end up playing. So I often reflect on those lyrics. But the earlier part, the free the spirit from the cell, I like that as well, because that's the point of socialism, is to unleash human creativity, unleash growth. Socialism is not about rolling back human history and we all go back to nature. No, it's about freeing the spirit from the cell. The restraints on human creativity and development that have been created by capitalism are lifted, so that the human spirit can really flourish. If you want to know Lenin's position on the Orthodox Church, go and read a very important pamphlet that's very clearly written called "What Should the Attitude of the Workers' Party Be Toward Religion?" And Lenin very clearly states the view of it's called, like, what is the view of the Workers' Party on the role of religion? What is the position? How does the Workers' Party relate to religion? It's a pamphlet by Lenin. And in it, he says, look, we're atheists. We don't believe in God. But, you know, we shouldn't go around fighting religion and trying to oppose religion. We should instead be spreading our working class program and hoping that we can win workers over with that. The pamphlet basically says that the Bolsheviks, on the one hand, they were atheists, they did oppose religion, etc. But on the other hand, they, as a policy, did not go around, you know, proclaiming there is no God, etc. The Bolsheviks, generally, their policy was to try and wage class struggle and, agitate, propagate, agitation propaganda, and win, support on that basis. That was the Workers' Party. That's Lenin. Read his pamphlet, and he argued there was a section of the Bolsheviks that were going around saying, "Oh, religion is the main enemy. We need to just go around promoting atheism all the time." And Lenin said, no, that's not the right answer. But the Bolsheviks, they opposed the Russian Orthodox Church. They saw it as part of the feudal order in Russia, and it was. I mean, the Tsar was not just the Tsar; he was like the Pope. He was the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. So there you go. All right. Okay. What would an anti-monopoly coalition look like in today's world? Labor unions, unemployment councils, you know, um, you know, um, working people, organizing, I mean, what else? I mean, people that are concerned about their communities, progressive activists, people who want better infrastructure. I think there would probably be some capitalists that would be part of that coalition that want a better country and think that, utilizing the state to develop the economy and suppress the power of monopoly capital would benefit them. Think of all the progressive forces that want a better country that go up against the power of the big corporations and banks and monopolies. That's who you'd be up against. That's who you'd be up against. All right. What's going on here? That's the last super chat I got. That's the last super chat question I've got. So, on that note, folks, I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. It's been fun. It's late. I'm tired, but hey, got to do what you got to do. So, there you go. Yeah. On that note, I'll end the way we always do. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And I think that's it. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. Fusion City now.